So if you follow the directions from the last section, you should have a directory that looks like this. And we will begin creating our full stack blog by first setting up the database, specifically the SQL schema. And this schema is essentially what will hold the shape and structure of our database. So go ahead and set up a SQL schema file in the main folder of the server directory. And important to note, even though we're creating a schema.sql file, this file itself does nothing. Even though we're creating and setting up the tables here, to actually use it as a database, we have to paste these in as commands to the PSQL shell. This is all something we'll see in the next section. And again, just to reiterate, this schema.sql file right here that we're going to create does absolutely nothing. It's just here so other people can understand what our SQL database looks like, and they can just copy and paste these commands into their own database if they want to set it up. So this file is basically just like a reference. So here in our schema.sql file, I'll first start by writing all of the code, and then I'll explain each line afterwards. So the first table we'll need is the users table, which will contain all the user profile data. The next table we'll need is the post table, which will hold all the submitted posts. And finally, we have the comments table, which will hold all the comments for all the posts. So let's break down each field and what it means. So let's start at first at the top with the users table. So our first column is UID serial primary key. And how you read SQL is everything in lowercase is user-defined names, and everything uppercase is SQL code. So the first way to read this is UID is the column name that we defined, and then serial primary key is the structure of that column. And serial primary key means this is basically the unique ID associated with each user, and it's auto-generated by PSQL. We don't have to do any randomization function to generate a unique number. To just make sure our user ID is unique, we just need to include the serial keyword. So serial and primary key are two different SQL commands. Next, we have username varchar 255 and then unique. And this just means a username column with varchar, which means the number of characters that are possible for the username, which we want to limit to 255. And finally, we want each username to be unique. So we just pass in the unique identifier. And varchar and unique are two different SQL commands, as we see in the next column, email. Email, we just have varchar 255 and we don't use a unique keyword here. And then email verified after our email, and this is just a boolean, so it can be either true or false. And after that, we just have date created with a type of date, and the date will actually come from PSQL itself. We'll just use a PSQL function to set the date, and the date will actually not come from our React or Express server. We can just set the date with PSQL itself. And after that, we just have a last login column, which is also a date. And after that, we have our post table. And the very first thing we need to do is have a primary key, which again just assigns a unique identifier to each post in the post table. And then we have the title of the post, which will limit to 255 characters. And after the title, we have the body. In this one, we'll just leave varchar. We won't set a limit for the body because certain posts can be very long, and we just want to have our users the ability to just submit very long posts. So for that reason, we'll just leave varchar without a limit. And after that, we have our user ID. So user underscore ID is the user defined column name that we set, and then it's an integer, and it's referencing the users table and user ID column. So altogether, how you would read this is user underscore ID is the column in the post table that's referencing the UID column in the users table. And this is the main function of SQL, is to have references in relations like this, so that when a user submits a post, their user ID is automatically associated with it in our database, which we can then use to look up their post using their user ID. And after that, we have the author field, which just holds the username of the user that submitted the post. And this one is a varchar type. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but varchar means variable character. And again, this is the same data type we set in the username field in the users table. And finally, we just have the date created, which is a timestamp type. And timestamp includes the time in addition to the date. And lastly, we have the comments table. And the very first row is, of course, the primary key ID, and this is the same as the other two tables. And then we have a comment field, which will hold the user submitted comment. And after that, we have the author, which is the same as we saw in the post table. And after that, the user ID, which references the users table and the user ID. And also the post ID, because remember, all of the comments for every post is going to be contained here. So to only get back the comments that are associated with a certain post, we need to reference the post ID. And we do so like this, just posts and then PID. And finally, we have the date created, which is just the timestamp and when the comment was created. And this is it. In the next section, we'll actually copy and paste these commands into our PSQL database and actually set up the database itself.